But it's not the loudest voice that's the right voice or the accurate voice. It's the collective, and it's your job as a developer, I think, to go out and hear all those different voices, because not all different voices have a megaphone on social media. And I think it's important to hear all of them to make a decision or not on a project.
And this is Scaling Clean, the podcast for clean economy CEOs, investors, and the people who advise them. I'm your host, Melissa Baldwin. Each show, we bring you usable insights from tested leaders that you can apply to the business of running your business. Just do it. That is Nike's famous slogan, but it's also the advice that Emilie Flanagan, CEO of Carson Power, has for women considering the leap into leadership. That determination shows up in how she's building her company too. Battery storage is emerging as one of the most critical and misunderstood technologies in the energy transition. Developers are racing to build new capacity, but local opposition is making storage a challenge. Carson Power is a distributed generation developer with about 200 megawatts of solar projects across New York and Illinois, and roughly a gigawatt hour of battery storage in development in New York. The company is doubling down on storage, prioritizing interconnection, and investing in a transparent, boots-on-the-ground engagement to move projects forward. Here's my interview with Emilie. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Emilie, thank you so much for joining Scaling Clean. I'm looking forward to talking to you. And what I'd like to start out with is just asking you, for those of our listeners who might not be familiar with your company, tell us about Carson Power. What do you do?
Yeah, sure. So we're a distributed generation developer. We have about 200 megawatts of solar across the state of New York and Illinois that are either under development, construction, or have been sent and currently operating with other independent power producers. But our focus really is on battery storage. We have about a gigawatt hour of batteries right now under development and in the queue in the state of New York, again, at the distributed generation level. And our focus really as a company is we find optimal places in the interconnection queue to interconnect, and then we champion the projects through the permitting process, find the suitable land, permit the projects, and then eventually sell them to a long-term owner and operator.
Excellent. And the way that I know you is that you and I met at Nico's Suncast Power Summit, and hats off to Nico, another fellow awesome podcaster in the industry. And when I met you there, you told me a little bit about your childhood, which I found fascinating. So could you share with our guests where you grew up and how that experience shaped who you are?
Yeah, for sure. That was a great summit. I'm glad we got the opportunity to meet there as well. I grew up overseas. So we left the U.S. actually when I was a little girl. My parents are American. We left the country when I was really young, like around 5 or 6. Ended up in Milan for my dad's career. After that, we actually ultimately ended up in Southeast Asia, and specifically Singapore, where I spent most of my childhood years. Graduated high school there, and then moved back to North America. I think the biggest thing about growing up kind of overseas and with so many different cultures, Singapore is just like this melting pot of different religions and nationalities and just all these different cultures. I don't know if I thought about it at the time, but definitely now as a developer, you're exposed to so many different perspectives and communities and cultures when you're a developer. You know, you're in the afternoon working in a smaller town talking about how the projects could be beneficial, and then in the afternoon you're working with big investment banks trying to figure out how to finance these projects. And so the ability, I think, as a child to have been exposed to so many different groups of people and perspectives really helped me shape how we do development and how I like to do development, is bring different people to the table and find common interests. I think that's really what development is about.
Excellent. No, that makes a ton of sense. It makes you quicker on your feet and able to kind of go from, I love what you said about going from having a conversation with people in the neighborhood in the morning to talking to a major big global bank in the afternoon.
You're walking the land with your boots and your jeans in the afternoon, making sure the power plant can get built, and then the next day you're down in New York City talking to a bigger bank trying to make sure that you can fund all of these developments. So it's it takes, you got to wear a lot of hats and you got to really be a great listener and talk to all these people from different walks of life and make sure that they feel heard. And I think growing up in all these different places and cultures helped tremendously with that.
That makes a ton of sense. Um, if you could go back to when you founded the company, what advice would you give to your younger self?
We have a motto at Carson, which is slow is smooth is fast. It's a motto that we've borrowed from the Navy SEALs, but it's essentially when high stakes environments are happening, it's okay to take some time to just do things properly and do them right, and then that actually ultimately speeds up the process. So, I think in the early days of starting a company, you're constantly under pressure of you got to make cash flows, you got to make sales, you got to get things moving, and you're kind of forced to rush a little bit into anything and into everything. Sorry, and I think with time now and perspective, I don't think I needed to rush so much into certain things. I think slow is smooth and smooth is fast. We could have probably taken a little bit more time around certain things.
That's a great motto. I love it. Um, Here's another question. Have you made any decisions in the last year that you think people in our industry might disagree with?
Yeah, I don't know if necessarily disagree, but it was definitely not what we people were doing about a year ago. So as you know, last year was a pretty volatile industry year. We obviously had the passage of the OBBB over the summer, and during that time, a lot of developers, operators, owners, folks in the industry were figuring out while the while the document was kind of bouncing around between the House and the Senate what they were going to do to hedge risk. And I think we took a pretty big bet on energy storage. We thought, you know what, we think this is going to be really a bipartisan technology, something that the OBBB is still going to want to see prosper. So we really doubled down on that. And the other thing that we didn't do is that we didn't safe harbor equipment. A lot of folks at the time, we were looking at doing it, but I think we made the decision ultimately not to safe harbor and really count that the market would rebalance itself from a supply chain perspective, and buyers would take that position. So it's definitely the more secure approach, but we decided to double down on energy storage, secure interconnection queue positions. Securing queue positions means kind of securing the market and the longer term viability of your pipeline. And so I think we definitely made a little bit of a different bet than what most folks were looking at the time.
Oh, that's fascinating. So you're saying, because I heard a lot of talk about safe harbor among developers, manufacturers
Yeah.
across the board, but you're saying that you prioritize the queue position. How do you think that worked out?
So far, so good. I mean, we're also a developer, so we ultimately sell our projects pre-construction to an owner and operator. And I was very confident that a lot of the big owners operators would have different viable safe harboring strategies, which we're seeing that they do now, and we kind of we're seeing. So yeah, so I guess like that on that front, yeah, it looks like our bet is paying off, and we've gotten a lot of really great strategic queue positions now in New York battery storage. So I would say we're quite happy with the decision that we made last year.
That makes a ton of sense, especially because, as the developer, that queue position is even higher priority if you're able to count on your partners, the owner operators to have the equipment. So that makes sense. What is something about leading a company and being a CEO that has surprised you?
I think what surprised me, I know this is going to sound not surprising, but as as a leader in a business, you're really just focused on people. And I think I really am surprised how much of my job actually is just about coaching and helping people, what we call at Carson, like see the signal. So it's kind of like see the forest through the trees and focus on what's really important in front of them. When you're kind of in the grind and doing your own job and all that, you can get a little bit of blinders on. And I think leadership, that's definitely been like the most surprising thing is how helpful it is to have someone kind of like pick your head up and look through the horizon and see if you're actually going in the right direction. And so I think that's something that I try and do a lot of. And it's been surprising how helpful I think that's been to the people that we manage here at Carson.
That's a great point. Can you think of an example or a story or anecdote on that point that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, let's tie it back to kind of the decision that we made last year to double down on energy storage. I think the year prior to that, during Trump's election cycle, a lot of us were really focused, and the team was really focused on solar, and we were looking at other markets like community solar in California and community solar in Pennsylvania. Um, and we know these markets definitely didn't play out the way most folks thought. And I think that's a good example of my team was so focused on let's do solar, let's do more solar, let's go after markets that we think are kind of our bread and butter. But having a different perspective and maybe being able to have a different vantage point than the rest of the business, I was kind of able to, like, I guess, defer and maybe not actually enter into those markets. And we ended up going into a whole new technology a little bit sooner than most of our counterparts did. And I think that was definitely kind of that ability to not be in the weeds while my team is in the weeds, to kind of see a little bit further the forest through the trees.
That's a great example. And it potentially gave you an early adopter advantage, right? Because you're able to get experience under your belt. I think that can help build community trust.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's the community engagement part that we're facing right now around storage is really critical. I think we're definitely at a stage right now where people are scared, and I understand it. It's a new technology. I understand new things are scary, and people have a lot of questions. Obviously, the Moss Landing fire, those images have gone viral and have created really a stain on battery energy storage, which is a real shame, because if you think about the technology, it's one of the safest technologies that we have from an energy storage perspective and from an energy perspective. One of the things I think you and I talked about a few weeks ago is just Americans are hurting right now. I mean, energy prices are absolutely through the roof. We are currently in a geopolitical dynamic with Iran where we're seeing oil shortages happening and some real volatility in energy prices. And if we could create more domestic energy in America and have a lot more local supply chains of power, we would see a lot less volatility, and prices would go down. And I'm hoping that we can get the message out there really quickly now, because we're facing a lot of resistance in communities around safety aspects, which are warranted, but they're being dealt with. We do a tremendous amount of studies to take care of that. And we do take safety incredibly seriously to make sure that these projects go well in communities that adopt them.
Well, on that point, you've talked about being upfront and transparent with communities. What does that look like in your opinion?
Yeah, so we have a pretty robust process in terms of how we approach communities. So we'll start really with the developers and our development operations manager. They'll usually reach out to the local representatives. They'll schedule a sketch plan meeting before we even start the permitting process. We'll go out there, sit down with them, show them the parcel that we've identified. I think, just as a side note, we can't really develop these projects anywhere we want to. There needs to be a lot of alignment of the stars. So there needs to be viable interconnection. You've got to have a landowner that actually wants to host the facility on their land. And you've got to have a municipality that has a zoning law or is willing also to give you a building permit to actually do these facilities. So the tremendous amount of time is spent on the front end in our process to identify the right location. And then in order for us to build trust with the community, we'll sit down with the supervisors or the town elected officials, show them the land. It's happened in the past that the town tells us that they don't like the project there, and we go back to the drawing board and look for another piece of land that is a little bit more viable for the town and is more palatable for the community. Once we do that, we start the permitting process. So one of the things that maybe is under spoken about is that how much process there is in the permitting process. We have to engage with a ton of agencies that require a tremendous amount of documentation. So a lot of paperwork and a lot of studies from geotech, from wetland surveys, from safety procedures and emergency response documents need to be submitted. For the community to be able to access that, we'll usually create like a Facebook page or a website where we post all of those documents so that they can peruse them freely whenever they want and see really what is everything that's going to be put into the system. And we try also and engage with the opposition or folks that are really against these projects. Sometimes it's successful. We come to the drawing board and we get to give them a different perspective, and they're really appreciative. Sometimes it's hard to break through, but we really try our best to communicate as transparently as possible all of the information and all of the process that goes into actually putting these facilities on the ground.
Have you, in the case where you mentioned like you've been able to talk with opposition and they've come around, is there anything you can share about that, about what you learned?
For sure, I think sometimes there are really simple solutions that get everybody to the table. I'm thinking about projects that we've had before, especially in solar in Illinois, where the neighbor that was maybe downstream of the land was worried about running water and like drainage issues and things like that. And we just ended up doing a lot more of a robust system there and mitigation for that specific parcel, with his guidance, with the neighbor's guidance. And he was really appreciative and actually came around to the project and he was like, oh, I've actually been meaning to also update some of this for a while. And this is great that the project is giving me the opportunity to do something that I was actually going to have to pay for myself. And we help them also with some of that. So there's a little bit of that. We do a lot of landscaping, for example, to mitigate against visual impacts. It's really, we want to make sure that the projects aren't just like dropped in the community and then we exit. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of the opposition sometimes is struggling to understand, rightfully so, like why and how these projects are beneficial to their community. So we spend a lot of time structuring like host community agreements, which are basically, instead of the town having to raise taxes to do improvements on behalf of the residents of the community, we'll do a host community agreement, which essentially does that. It allows maybe I think we had one project where they wanted pickleball courts and for the community. So we supported in the build out of that. It could be really varied, but we really, it's all about what the town is looking for to make this project accepted by the community.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. I had a note here that I wanted to ask you about the tax benefit and WIFM, right? WIFM, what's in it for them? So I think that's interesting to hear your perspective on how you're able to communicate to the community, hey, what is in it for them?
Yeah, no, I think, look, there's some benefits that are really direct and obvious. The example of the pickleball court. The town is looking to invest in some infrastructure. I think we had one project too where they had a library that needed some remodeling. So there's real host community agreements that we can really directly tie as direct benefits to the community. The ones that are harder to tie is really kind of at the macro level driving energy prices down. But the reality of the matter is that the more energy we can produce locally and store locally, because energy storage essentially takes the energy that's produced there and stores it, the more we can have a supply of electricity in the market. And so therefore it just drives prices down. That's the one that's harder for folks to see, because that does take time. It's not just like one project is built and suddenly prices fall by like 30%. You need to have a lot of these facilities built across the United States to really see a downward movement on electricity prices. And that's a harder one to tie directly when you're in permitting. But that's where I think it's important for us to get out there and like explain how these systems are built and why they do drive electricity prices down, because they do increase a lot of the supply that goes on the grid, and helps create more stability in the grid and less volatility with storage. So there's a lot of benefits, but that's a harder one to show directly with immediate, impact within a day or two.
Yeah, it's not a clear line that connects.
It's a harder line to explain, and it's critical and it's really important, especially right now.
On that note, you talked about your transition from, solar to storage. How do you decide between standalone storage and solar plus storage?
It depends, honestly. It's really based on the land and the interconnection capacity, as well as the permit, so the appetite of the community to host a solar facility. Right now, we're very focused on standalone storage, just because, we're still a small team and we're growing, but we're still a small team and there is power in focus. And so right now, it is more important for us to just get moving on our standalone storage pipeline. But ultimately, it all boils down to, is there interconnection capacity? Is there a good viable piece of land? Is the town interested in hosting this facility? Do we have all the right permits? Have we run all the environmental diligence to make sure that this can happen? And it could work. Both projects could work, but it really all boils down to that.
My last question on community engagement and project development is on just thinking from beginning to end. What is the most difficult part of getting projects from concept to operation right now? What's your biggest roadblock?
Honestly, I think it's the community and engagement part, and sort of the ensuring that like everyone kind of sees the benefits of it. We're at a state right now where I think it's hard for people to realize the benefits. It's a new technology, but that would be right now the biggest hurdle that we have.
And when you look across the industry at your peers, what do you think? Because one of the things that we've noticed at TigerCom, we work with developers across the country, and different developers have different levels of investment in community engagement. How have you invested in that? What would be your advice to other developers on how to make those tough decisions around budgets and what to allocate to community engagement?
Oof, it's a tough question because there's not like one size fits all. I think it's really about everything has to be boots on the ground and grassroots at this point. And we spend, God, like at least a couple of months with the town, or a month or two before we actually engage in the permitting process. I think at that point is really the time where you can sort of craft up a budget and actually understand how you're going to be engaging with them. But honestly, it's all about personal relationships. Like the more you can go out there and meet with people one-on-one at their kitchen table and explain to them what this is about, like the better the return on like the project's understanding.
Okay, well let's move on to the next section on marketing and AI. So,
Yeah.
what is the toughest marketing or communication challenge that you're facing right now?
I think social media is obviously a platform that is great because it can reach the masses, but it can also skew kind of facts in a really terrible way, honestly. It's easy to slice and dice things that are posted and just turn it to a certain narrative that is not necessarily anchored on facts. I think social media is a bit of a dangerous tool, to be honest. I mean, it reaches a lot of masses, but it can definitely be manipulated. So I think it's a tough one to mitigate against, because we're doing something I think right now that's incredibly important for the country, and we need to develop a lot of energy for people, and a lot of that fear is transformed into narratives that flood social media, which are just inaccurate.
Yeah. I noticed when you talked earlier about how you communicate, you talked about having a project Facebook page or setting up a place where you can communicate to the public. And I think it's so important for developers to be transparent, to communicate openly. And unfortunately, Facebook is a new town square, right? So that's where people are. And you're right, it can be a challenging medium because things can get out of control. But I do think that it is important to make sure that you're doing your part to fill that void, right? Because if you leave the void empty, it will be flooded by opposition. So
I think you're spot on, Melissa. I think look, the beauty of social media is that you can connect directly with the people, right? And so for us, at least, our Facebook pages are really intended to be a Q&A spot where people that are, it's a lot harder to maybe get a hold of the people in the company now, but the Facebook page is a direct access to us. It's a direct line of communication, and ask us anything. We're an open book, and we will supply the information and in a factual way with the reports that we have. And I think that's how we've been really leveraging the power of social media. It's just like connecting directly to the communities and establishing that kind of like direct chat line, if you will. that you don't really have anymore by like calling customer service. Like that just doesn't really happen anymore. So the communication channels that we have now with Facebook and social media are really, really great and important. I think to your point though, often when you try and get out there and put all your best interests to be transparent and supply all the information, people do take advantage of that and turn your words against you and take advantage of that sometimes, which is a little bit of a shame, but that is kind of also the power of social media.
Mm-hmm. And you're never going to make everyone happy. It's just an impossible standard. So I don't think we should hold ourselves to that standard, but certainly being there to have reasonable conversations with people who are naturally curious is a smart thing to do. I want to turn to another topic, and that is AI. So talk to me about how your company is using AI, whether you're using it or not. And what parts of your business do you feel still require that human touch?
Yeah, I'd say, look, I'm a firm believer that AI is not going to replace humans. I don't believe in the robot revolution taking over humans, but I do feel that AI though has incredible power to increase our efficiency at work. And what I've been really working on with all of our employees, I mean, we're not downsizing the team because of AI. We're actually using that as a tool to make them more efficient in terms of their day to day. So honestly, they have actually more time to spend with their families. And so they have less time to, over the weekend to answer more emails. So there's a lot of amazing tools right now with AI that just lets you process a lot of, emails or spreadsheets or things like that that used to require a ton of time that just make you more efficient. And so it allows us actually to focus on what I think is the most important job, which is actually connecting with people, connecting with our landowners, connecting with our communities, connecting with our families, our friends. But AI is actually the tool that can operate in the background and do what would require us, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours of spreadsheet work, maybe only 2 hours. So we're still operating and we're still doing the work, but it's allowing us so much more efficiency to actually now drive up to the communities, spend more time with people, like we're doing a lot of community events in the next couple of weeks. Those are things that when you're pressed for time, because there's so much to do in a day, it's hard to invest good quality in. And now with AI, we're able to shift our focus to that and have kind of the robot do the more processing tasks that we would kind of bottleneck us all.
It makes a ton of sense. We found that in our firm, we use AI. What it's really good at is for boring, repetitive tasks that take a long time that people do not enjoy doing.
That's it. Yeah.
And
so you
move that off your plate.
Yeah, for sure. And you still need a human to have the critical thinking behind the task, and everything is going to still require human touch. I hope, and maybe this is wishful thinking, but like, I hope AI is actually going to be a tool that brings the communities back together, because we're going to have more time to actually do that instead of just, being at work for 12 hours a day doing spreadsheet works and things that we can become so much more efficient at. So we've definitely encouraged the team here to use it as a super tool, and focus their time on like community building and relationship building.
Yeah, that's where it counts. That's right. Moving on to learning and development, are there any management trends that you're following or something new that you might be trying out? Anything you like or don't like about that you can share with our listeners?
Sure. So I guess a couple of things. First, the OKR system. So we really, the company that we've built here is really run on the objectives key result system. The book is Measure What Matters, which kind of explain the whole OKR system, but it's really the Google operation system. It's how Google sort of sets its objectives, and key results are all the different metrics. We also have something that's a little bit different than most companies, is that we work on 60-day periods. We don't work in quarters. We don't work in monthly. We work actually in 60-day periods. And I found that to be really efficient and productive in a industry that's as dynamic as ours. When you run everything in quarters, you really only have 4 times in a year where you can really reflect on your goals, your objectives, and pivot in a different direction the company. when you're working on 60-day periods, you have an extra 2 checkpoints where you can actually do that.
Quarterly is just long enough that it's like, oh, it's in the distance, and then nope, it's here. So
Yeah, and monthly's too short, you know. I think I forget which successful entrepreneur said this, but it's like humans overestimate how much they can do in a month and underestimate what they can do in a year. And I think it's kind of that philosophy, right? It's like in 60 days, you can actually achieve a lot, but when you're trying to cram it all in 1 month, it does create that unnecessary pressure and puts everyone kind of in a like sets up everyone kind of to fail. So if we set everything on 60-day increments, we can be ambitious enough, but like there's some breathing room that allows folks to get the goals done.
and it pairs well with what you said earlier that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Is that right?
Yeah.
All right. So, for professional development, are there any books, podcasts, anything that you've learned or that you draw from that you would recommend to our listeners?
So like I said, Measure What Matters is a really good book. That's really the OKR system that I like. I'm a big fan of also reading, honestly, biographies. Anything from Richard Branson, Elon Musk, the founder of Nike. So Shoe Dog is a really fun read. It tracks kind of like the founder of Nike in his early days, and I find they're fun reads to kind of understand how these people thought about like building up their companies, and how there's a lot of fake it till you make it in a lot of these books, which I find always interesting and a little bit inspirational too, because we're all trying to figure it all out all the time.
Very good. Um, do you think that success relies on what a company chooses to do or what they choose not to do?
You've got to really strike that right balance. Sometimes it is about moving forward and choosing what to do and go after something. But sometimes, and especially with the jobs that we do, it's about not doing anything and kind of like letting, like walking away from something, or just choosing to maybe let things cool off or cool down. I think yeah, it really depends. It depends on the circumstance, but striking that right balance is, I think, where companies get really successful.
So pick your battles.
Pick your battles and let go. Sometimes it's not about always winning. It's about what makes sense for all of the stakeholders involved in a given project. But it's not the loudest voice that's the right voice or the accurate voice. It's the collective, and it's your job as a developer, I think, to go out and hear all those different voices, because not all different voices have a megaphone on social media. And I think it's important to hear all of them to make a decision or not on a project.
I love that. It's not always the loudest voice. That's a great point, Emilie.
I think that's the downfall of social media too, is that often that people think that that's the common opinion because it's just the loudest voice on social media. But when you actually go and meet people and talk to communities and sit down at, agencies' kitchen table or other community groups, you actually realize that, oh my gosh, there's actually all these other people that aren't speaking up and actually are really supportive of the project or want to speak up about it, but they don't actually know because they don't really want to go on Facebook. They would rather talk about it at their community center. And so helping them kind of, channel their, I guess their voice is also really important for what we do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm down to my last two questions. One of them is, what do you do just to sustain life as a CEO? You're busy. I'm sure you have a ton of meetings, a ton of responsibilities. What do you do at work or in your personal life just to maintain your mental health?
Yeah, no, I run a lot. So I try and run a lot, which is good. That usually clears my head. It's pretty meditative, I guess, when I run. So I like going for long runs, like anything minimum of 3 miles up to 8-10 miles is always a good way to, even if it ends up being a walk run, it's still a good way to get to get your brain to turn off a little bit. And then I'm fortunate enough that I get to travel a lot just for work, and I try and kind of add a day or two between business trips to explore a city that I've never been to. We had a big conference in Phoenix, Arizona, for example, a couple of weeks ago. I'd never been to Arizona, and I was able to stay a couple of days before and after to just kind of go hiking and explore the scenery, and it was super cool and beautiful. So that's a good way to balance the travel from work.
Nice. That's great. Get out of your head and into your body. That's the advice that I've been given, is like sometimes we can get so caught up in our thoughts. And so finding that way to escape and reset is great. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners before we end this interview?
We are a country right now that's really completely divided around pretty staunch opinions about things. And I'm really encouraging all of us to kind of come together, maybe in a more common sense way moving forward.
Let me ask the inverse of that then. Like, what gives you hope right now?
I think, when we go out to communities, like like I was saying, the loudest voice isn't necessarily the only voice. And so I think when you go talk to folks one-on-one or in different community groups and all that, you actually notice that so many more people have things in common and share similar values of what we want this country to look like, what we want the energy sector to look like, how we should be talking to each other. So there's a lot of hope because I think we all feel that way. It's more just about channeling those voices and helping us realize that actually the masses, we all feel that way, which is why I was saying, like, the loudest voice isn't probably the voice. So that gives me a lot of hope because I think a lot of people are just not being heard, but a lot of people feel that we do need to come together and actually share a tremendous amount of similarities around so many topics. We just need to create those megaphones for that aspect, and then I think we'll all realize how much more unified we are.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Scaling Clean, the podcast for clean economy CEOs, investors, and the people who advise them. I'm your host, Melissa Baldwin. Our producer is Claire Quirin. If you like what you hear on Scaling Clean episodes, we'd appreciate it if you'd give us a 5-star rating and leave a comment where you get your podcast. And until next time, we wish you all the best in the clean economy transition.